Good morning, everyone. I'm hoping this records the slides. I wanted to talk about just a couple of things and show you a couple of projects. Firstly, this issue of the Belvedere. We've touched on it before, but I just keep thinking how relevant it is to the site, considering that the lookout idea, this meringue, this Indigenous word, still never been entirely sure whether that is what the site has been called, but it does make sense. But let's just go over this Belvedere idea, this beautiful far view. It's an older Italian term that's been used as a spatial design strategy in all sorts of ways, from more historically through the Renaissance Baroque period with the Villa Savoy down the bottom left, to much more modern examples up there on the right. I'm just going to quickly take us back to one of Astrid's projects that Judge Our Architects Plan Park. There we get a big Belvedere as a public space with the big lookout view in the Netherlands. I think it's Rotterdam, actually. A project that I think is almost an inverted Belvedere, but it's actually a project I just love. And so I just wanted to make sure you've seen it, I suppose, whilst you're with me in this very short term. It's Mary Mrs. Greenwood Pond double site project, completed in 1996. But I do love this image. I'll show you a couple of other images of it. It's well worth Googling. Mary Miss and going to her website. It's a terrific website. Landscape artist. I don't know if she calls herself a landscape architect. She's practiced mostly from the 80s and she's still doing projects. They're very interesting to look at. I can highly recommend you do. But just that image there alone, this idea of a sort of inverted Belvedere where the water surface, we go skimming along the top of it, and our outlook, this lookout is across the water, but I think it's just very clever and sophisticated the way she has arranged this there. The broader site image is a greater pond edge. So it's not as relevant to this site in some ways, but I like this idea of thinking of the sport ovals almost as a big pond or something, and I don't know, messing around with the edges a little bit. And that's partly what I want to talk through a little bit. The detailing on some of these path edges, exquisite. The seat within that inverted Belvedere down below, just inviting people in. Just this sort of invitation. Sit here. You don't have to, but perhaps you'd like to. I am going to read a little bit off her website here because I think the whole project is really interesting. Initiated by the Des Moines Arts Centre as one of a series of artist installations in the museum park, the project was developed over a 7-year period. We love a bit of time. Given the number of organisations interested in the park, I decided to collaborate with various local groups to make a place which would operate on several levels, a site which could be layered onto another site and which would have multiple readings. The importance of the park to the immediate neighbourhood is made apparent by invoking and building upon layers of associations and memories which have collected over time. Walking around the pond, shifting between overviews and cutouts within the water surface. I love this cut out of the water surface. The individual visitor is able to trace an intimate view of the place while putting together a new understanding of how it operates visually and physically. I think that's a very nice way to be thinking of Christensen Park, about this ability to trace an intimate view of the place while putting together a new understanding. So a new understanding of it. It's not just a bloody sport field. It's not just a cliff. It's all sorts of things. We know it's a peak of a water catchment. We know it's a road siding. We know it is a sport field. We know it's Eastern Suburbs Banksia scrub territory. We know it is a phenomenal double view of horizon and of two horizons. I'll just continue. Additionally, the makeup and processes of a Midwestern wetlands becomes clearer as one understands their role in the immediate environment. Paths lead the viewer to multiple ways of seeing this place. A walkway overhang the edge of the pond makes it possible to move out of the water. That's a lovely thing to do with a sort of somewhat, the sport field, this idea that it's this contained space and no one can enter it, dog walkers. But just she just plays with those edges a little bit. And I do feel that there is room for that with this idea of messy edges or mowing regimes, etc. Proceeding around the water's edge, a ramp disappears into the water after getting the visitor down to the level of the pond. The line of this ramp extends in a long arc across the pond, marked first by wood pilings and then by a concrete-lined trough cut into the water. Thank you, Mary Miss, for telling us how it's made. Adjacent to this arc on the land, the walkway continues around the edge of the pond past a series of structures, including a pavilion. Now, I think this is really interesting when we think of that lecture I released last week, not mine, but this idea of messy ecosystems and orderly frames. This idea that perhaps we just need to just be placing certain elements to invite people, I suppose, to experience a place in a different way. It's a hook in. And so how do we deal with this idea of sort of regenerating the headland as Eastern Banks is heath, as well as have people? And I think Mary Mrs. projects, you can look through many of them on her website. I think they really do offer clues, but I think this idea of sort of messy ecosystems, orderly frames, is very interesting. Adjacent to this arc on the land, the walkway continues around the edge of the pond, past a series of structures, including a pavilion, a mound, curving wood trellis to form the other side of the ellipse. A large leaf-shaped space is outlined by these structures, affirming and making palpable the connection between the land and the water. The covered pavilion with a seating area inside is built up against the curving mound, which rises almost to the height of the pavilion and seems to wrap it into the landscape. I mean, she's got great sensitivity, this woman, towards the land and the topography. Continuing around the edge of the pond, a small bridge pavilion allows the viewer to descend to the water once again in an area filled with water lilies. Proceeding further, there is an entrance down into a concrete trough where one is able to sit at eye level with the surface of the water having been kept to the edge at a distance. The visitor is able to actually enter the pond. One feels the protection of the concrete walls holding back the pressure of the surrounding water. Above the trough, on the other side of the path, is a series of stone terraces on a hillside filled with prairie grass. Movement is key to the experience of the project. The visitor constructs an understanding of the site through the experience, the multiple elements, and the relationship created between them. I think much of that is very transferable to Christensen Park and to any design you ever attempt to do. Just a couple of images in more detail. And again, I'm just swinging back to this idea of the Belvedere, this idea as a spatial experience. And here a much sort of, very fine, simply done, but beautifully finished and crafted Belvedere there as some sort of lookout over that wetland area. Another project, and I'm still in this little theme, I suppose, of a Belvedere. This won a Rosa Barbara Landscape Prize a couple of years ago. It's a Spanish project at Badia del Valls. And I think it's a very nice sort of contemporary, it's a lift well, but as a contemporary way of dealing with topography and this idea of the Belvedere. Certainly these sort of ways moving up and down could be something to explore, not necessarily a lift, I don't think it's that tall, but on the western side of Christensen Park. And this is a much, a sort of very developed, rather expensive in a way, not too expensive, installation. But I just think that's worth keeping in mind. This has been a favourite project for so long, and I lost it in a series of magazines. It's in an architecture review from about 1998. And I phoned Susie Kumar and Chris Sawyer. They are a husband and wife, and they're the founders of their own practice site office, and they did the foreshore design at St Kilda, which we've looked at before. Susie is a landscape architect. She graduated from RMIT in the early 90s, and she did this project with her sister, who's an artist, Naomi Kumar, and it's Naomi who's taken these images. This is a footy oval down in Melbourne, and this $18,000 it cost, bench. They won it as a public art installation, but I think it's so clever. It's this flat red line. It's visually just zing with that green lawn, and they hold one level. like they hold a datum on it, so that the nuances of the topography change around the oval allow these different seat heights. Just while we're on this bit here with the wording, you can probably read that yourself. Does anyone want to know? The sculpture is designed to describe the boundary between the formal oval and the natural creek bank. That's a very nice play of edges there. Benchmark, clever name. It works beautifully at a sort of step away scale. And I think this is a scale that Kristen Park is kindred to. There we get a very low seat, for a little child, a little 3-year-old, have a perfectly comfortable time sitting there, whereas an adult would be up on this probably more half a metre high component of the bench. But I think it's such a strong installation, and I think it just makes you read the topography, and it's why I've been meaning to show it to you all term. And I found a couple of other images of Randazzo Park by myself and Leanne O'Shea, also swinging back now about 20 years. But I just thought the long line, we put this long, beautiful purple line that our wonderful Astrid Hild helped us design. That's how we met Astrid, because she was involved in lighting with us. We have these bollards along this front edge, which were also the name. So the name of the park was Randazzo, and there's D-A-Z-Z-O. So it's an understanding that of sort of multiple use of elements. So the light is also the seat, the long line over the edge, very much eyes on the street, very much low lighting, thinking of Astrid's words. It's also the art, I suppose. It's also the signage, all these things we didn't have to put in, like all the time thinking, what don't we have to put in? What can we not put in? What can we leave out? And by doing that, it forces you to make multiple use decisions. There's that long bench by day, and the lighting just slips in underneath. It's actually 3 long benches. It's also the fencing to the playground. And there's our mounds, which sadly were removed. Oh, this one makes me shed a tear. I can see them on the far right there. They were part of the playground. But the long bench from the other way becomes a continuous line, but it was in fact broken up into segments to allow entrances in and out of the park and into the playground. At detail, with the work of Astrid and another wonderful friend who was a fashion designer, Marlena Krantz. Somebody's really knocking at the door. That's such a drag. I'll try and finish on Randazzo. There's the balls. Hang on. A little bit more there. Feeling a bit rushed. There's a plan. There's a bad setting. Okay, Marty Francis, Girona Shores. Hold that thought. I'm going out the door. I'm going to keep the recording going. Oh, hello. Hello. Can you hold that door? I'm just recording. Hang on. Come in. Marty Francis, Girona Shores. Sophie, I'll be back 5 minutes. Which is a project I've talked about before, I think in about 6 weeks ago, but I just wanted us to touch base on it because it's so good, and I still think it's so very relevant to your site. So here, define a Belvedere, the distant view. How hard can it be with Sydney Harbour and the Pacific Ocean? So here, Marty Front has literally just sort of mown out a Belvedere with this very simple bench there. I'm now going to see if I can share my screen to the Lanzine website, which has images of the Marty French project, which I think are just terrific. So this is in section, beautiful section. We get a real feeling of the site. We get a real feel of the habitat involved, and what his office is doing here is these terrifically simple, in some ways, drawings showing us how it's going to be maintained with a whippersnipper. The undergrowth clearing once a year. The shrubland will be clipped by hand. I think he means once for the first 5 years, maybe. The high meadow is clipped with whippersnipper once a year, and the low meadow is mown 6 to 8 times a year. And you can see that lovely little legend above each one, a very nice layout. Learn from this Marty French's graphics. I'm not going to go into this. It's worth looking over the lanzine.com website. You can just go martyfranch.com, Marty Franch Girona Shores. But this idea of having a sort of a plan of action around how the ground is actually maintained. I am going to pull us into, don't get too detailed on this, but there's some very simple, powerful moves like the clearing around of a forest to allow access for kids to climb on stuff. A more considered intervention as a path, and again, this idea of different levels of lawn mowing, with an idea of how it's done. Look at, the secateurs up the top, as you cut little branches coming off the path. Like, no one ever does this. It's so awesome. This is gardening at grand scale. A couple of images I really wanted you to see before I get off this is, that's a great overall 3D, showing us a sense of maintenance, showing us a sense of habitat. And how that lawn does different things. Okay, now this idea to take us back to last week's lecture, this messy ecologies, orderly frames, just by placing a sort of made seat, just that block from some timber on the site, and it suddenly suggests a seating spot. That is very low cost, and that is about just caring, really. Mowing in a particular way, near the rocks, inviting people to sit. It invites the existing granite rock to be part of that seating area. It's so low key. Your moves do not have to be big. And again, this invitation to sit and watch a view. And Marty French does this several times there. Again here, so some very simple installation. Again here, a very simple invitation to sit and look at a view. It does not have to be a $300,000 hanging out over the edge of a cliff experience. Just getting it right, getting it in the right place is a winning combination. It will work. I promise you. Anyway, some more moments. This, I think, is also terrific, where I remember seeing him talk about this on some online lecture. And they did this frame. They built it. It was going to last, I don't know, 2 to 5 years. And in that time, they were going to go for funding. And I don't think I've got the image here, but there's another more established framing device when they got funding. And I think it's made out of bronze or some bloody thing. But this idea of just suggesting, and you can see that existing Leptospermum blavigardum copse or little forest over on the eastern edge of the park, there could be some suggestions there of how you frame that magnificent clifftop view without even having to build anything else. Okay, that's it for this little discussion. Thanks all.